I sat there, my heart racing in the dimly lit sauna, feeling the heat not just from the steaming wood around me, but from the weight of my thoughts pressing on my chest. The low hum of the sauna fan was the only sound, a distant, almost mocking reminder that the stillness inside wasn't the same as peace. I had been here many times before, alone with my own worries, but today it felt different. Today, there was something in the air, an unspoken tension that coiled tighter with every passing second. As the sweat dripped down my neck, I tried to calm my racing thoughts. My stepson, Alex, had always been a quiet presence in my life, someone I trusted, someone I had never seen in any way but a son. But now, everything had changed. The sudden memory of his touch, the accidental moments, the lingering glances that I had brushed aside, they played over and over in my mind. Each replay sending waves of confusion and guilt crashing over me. Was I imagining things? Or had something shifted between us that day? I couldn't figure it out. My mind screamed that it was wrong, that this wasn't how things were supposed to be. But my body remembered things it shouldn't. I could feel the tension building again, that same heat rising from within me, and I wasn't sure whether it was the sauna's temperature or the situation itself pushing me into dangerous waters. What was I doing here, sitting alone with all this turmoil, wondering if I had crossed a line? The questions swirled unanswered as I sat frozen, unsure of the right thing to do. Alex had always been the quiet type. He wasn't one to speak much, but his presence was always felt. When he came into my life, I never expected much from him. He was just my stepson, a young man finding his way. I treated him like any other part of the family, offering the guidance I could while giving him space to grow. But lately, something had shifted. His emotions had become more apparent, more intense, and they seemed to echo in the smallest of gestures. I noticed the way he would look at me when he thought I wasn't paying attention, his eyes lingering, filled with something I couldn't quite place. It wasn't just admiration, there was a depth to it, something that made me uncomfortable yet strangely captivated. One evening, when he handed me a glass of water, his fingers brushed against mine just a brief moment, but it lingered in my mind longer than it should have. I quickly pulled my hand away, pretending not to notice, but the unspoken tension was undeniable. Alex didn't apologize, didn't say a word. Instead, he looked at me for a long moment, and his gaze held a silent weight, something deeper than just familial affection. His expression said it all. I know what you're feeling. That night after dinner, we found ourselves in the sauna together, an unexpected moment of privacy. The silence was heavy between us, but neither of us spoke. I could feel the heat radiating from him, not just from the sauna's warmth, but from the undeniable tension that filled the space. He leaned in just enough that I could feel his presence close to mine, and for a brief second, our shoulders touched. The contact was electric, sending a shiver down my spine. I couldn't look at him, afraid that I might see something in his eyes that I wasn't ready to face. I wanted to pull away, to break the silence, but my body was frozen. His closeness, his energy, it was all too much to process. We stood there, inches apart, neither of us moving. It was as though the space between us had become charged, like every unsaid word hung in the air, waiting to be spoken. But still, we stayed silent. And in that silence, the emotional bond between us seemed to stretch and twist, leaving me to wonder how far it had truly gone. The heat in the sauna seemed to grow with every passing second, but it wasn't the steam that made my pulse quicken. It was the space between Alex and me, a space that had once been safe, now thick with unspoken words and undeniable tension. The silence was suffocating, and the longer we remained in it, the harder it became to ignore the feeling that something was shifting, something I wasn't prepared to confront. I could feel his eyes on me, even though I never turned to look. It was as though his gaze was a weight pressing on the back of my neck. When I did finally glance at him, his expression was unreadable. But his eyes held something deep, something that made my breath catch in my throat. The intensity in them was like a silent confession, one that neither of us could speak aloud. His body shifted slightly closer to mine, and the small movement sent a ripple of nervous energy through me. I wanted to move away, to distance myself from whatever was happening between us, but I couldn't. I was paralyzed by the confusion of it all. What was he thinking? Was I overreacting? His proximity, his presence, it was intoxicating, but it was also dangerous. I could feel the unspoken words, the what-ifs swirling in the air between us. Neither of us said a thing, but in the space between each silent second, I could feel the walls between us crumbling. Alex reached up as if to adjust his towel, but his hand brushed mine in the process. The touch was light, barely there, but it sent a jolt of electricity through my body, and I couldn't ignore it. My heart raced, and I quickly withdrew my hand, hoping he hadn't noticed how shaken I was. But I knew he had. The way his eyes flickered just for a moment told me everything. The tension was palpable now, unbearable. We were both playing a dangerous game, teetering on the edge of something neither of us could control. I tried to focus on the warmth of the sauna, the sweat trickling down my face, anything to distract myself from the emotions rising within me. But I couldn't. Every time I moved, every time I shifted my body, I could feel him there, a presence I couldn't escape. I could see him clenching his fists, his knuckles white from the strain, and I wondered if he was feeling the same confusion I was. He wasn't looking at me anymore, his gaze fixed on the wooden slats in front of him, but his body was still so close to mine. It was like a constant pull, his presence drawing me in, yet everything in me screamed to push him away. There was a moment when our eyes met again, and this time I didn't look away. The silence between us was thick, and the shared glance felt like 1,000 words we couldn't speak. In that one look, everything was said. Everything I had been trying to avoid, everything I didn't want to face was there. He was waiting for me to make a move, to say something, to acknowledge what was happening between us. But I couldn't. A wave of hesitation washed over me. I wanted to act, but the fear, the guilt, it held me back. It was like I was drowning in my own emotions, unable to find a way out. Should I step back? Should I let things unfold? Was I ready for the consequences? And yet, no matter how much I tried to pull away, a part of me couldn't help but feel the magnetic pull toward him, closer and closer with every passing second. The heat in the sauna seemed to melt away all the barriers I had put up. The world outside felt distant, irrelevant, as the only thing that mattered was the intense pull between Alex and me. It was as if time had stopped, leaving only the raw emotion in the air between us. My breath was shallow, each exhale mingling with the warm steam, while his eyes never left mine. There was no more hesitation, no more questioning, it was just us, two souls caught in a moment too powerful to ignore. Slowly, almost instinctively, I leaned forward, closing the gap that had once seemed impossible to bridge. His hands moved toward my face, and in that gentle gesture, I felt everything he hadn't said, every emotion, every hesitation, every desire. His fingertips lightly brushed my cheek, sending a ripple of warmth across my skin. The soft touch was a silent invitation, a permission to surrender, and without thinking, I responded. Our foreheads met, the warmth of his skin radiating against mine. We stayed like that for a moment, our eyes locked, each of us searching for something in the other's gaze. It wasn't just lust or attraction, it was something deeper, something that transcended words. In that moment, I knew we had both been waiting for this. I tilted my head slightly, and before I could second-guess myself, I pressed my lips to his. The kiss was slow at first, hesitant, but it soon deepened, becoming more urgent, as if we both realized how long we'd been holding back. It wasn't about the physical, it was about the release of everything we had both been feeling but unable to express. His hands found their way to my back, pulling me closer, and I responded by tracing his shoulders with my fingers, memorizing the feel of him. I felt his hand move to my hair, gently pushing it away from my face before his lips found mine again, this time more fiercely. A soft gasp escaped me, but I didn't pull back. I wanted this. I needed this. The touch of his lips, the warmth of his body, it all felt like a confirmation of everything I'd been afraid to admit. His hands slowly traced down my back, pulling me even closer until our bodies were pressed together. The world outside disappeared. There was only the sensation of his hands, the soft pressure of his lips, and the unmistakable feeling of intimacy building between us. The connection was undeniable, and we both surrendered to it. Every touch, every caress felt like an acknowledgement of the emotions we could no longer deny. In that moment, it wasn't about what came next, but about the simple act of being together, emotionally and physically, without the need for words. Just two people, lost in the intimacy of a moment that would change everything. The sauna felt unbearably quiet after it all. The steam had thickened, but there was an odd stillness in the air now, one that felt too heavy to breathe through. I sat back, my heart still racing, trying to process what had just happened. Alex, too, seemed lost in thought, his gaze fixed somewhere in the distance, but I could sense the internal shift within him as well. Neither of us spoke immediately. Words felt unnecessary after everything we just shared. I couldn't stop replaying the moment over and over in my mind. It had been so intense, so consuming. At first, there had been uncertainty, the fear of crossing a line we couldn't undo. But now in the aftermath, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had irrevocably changed. Was it worth it? I didn't know. I wanted to say I was at peace, but I wasn't sure I was. The emotional tension that had led up to this moment wasn't gone. It had transformed into something deeper, more complex. Alex finally broke the silence, his voice softer than I expected. I don't know what this means for us, but I can't forget what happened. I didn't have an answer for him. I wasn't sure I had one for myself either. What had started as an undeniable attraction had now become something more, something that felt like it might tear us apart or bring us closer together. There was a part of me that wanted to distance myself, to retreat back to what was familiar, but another part couldn't deny the profound connection that had just been made. In that moment, I realized that no matter how much I wanted to pretend like it hadn't happened, it was impossible to ignore what we had shared. As I looked at Alex, I knew that nothing would be the same between us anymore, but I wasn't sure if that was a bad thing. He was looking at me with a mixture of vulnerability and longing, his own inner turmoil mirrored in his eyes. And in that silence, I understood. I wasn't alone in feeling torn. I stood up, taking a final look at him. I need some time to think. As I walked away, I knew things couldn't go back to how they were. Yet, I didn't regret what had happened. Not for a moment. There was a quiet peace in that realization, even if the path forward was unclear. Whatever would come next, I knew that this moment would shape everything. But for now, all I could do was take a step forward into the uncertainty, carrying the weight of our connection with me. It wasn't an ending. It wasn't a resolution. But it was the beginning of something that would change us both forever.